Okay, so now that we have sketched out our low fidelity wireframes, it's time to move on to our mid fidelity wireframing. Mid fidelity wireframes are done to flesh out the layout and the visual hierarchy and structure of the various pages of your application. So we are going to go ahead and use the wireframing kit, which if you have not gotten yet, it is available with the course bundle at mckinseychild.me/courses. Let's jump into the wireframe UI elements Illustrator file, and we are going to start by grabbing the browser template. So let's just go ahead and copy that in. So we're not going to wireframe every single page, but just the main ones for this course. And then we are going to move into Photoshop and actually start designing the look and feel of our application. But for now, we are going to do, let's do the welcome page. So I'm going to grab the type tool by hitting T, and I'm going to type home, and then I'm going to grab the I and match that color. Okay, so what we need to do is go into our wireframing kit. I know for the welcome page, basically it's going to be sort of a filter. We don't want really much of anything on the page except for a title explaining what it is, a few buttons to tell the user where they should go, and a image in the background. So let's start with the image in the background. I'm just going to copy this first image right here, paste that in. I'm actually going to hit the A key and select the background and just keep this for now. And let's center that and make it full size to represent the full size background image. And I'm going to lighten the color just a bit. It's still a little too dark. There we go, that looks good. Now let's go back to our wireframing kit and go to the navigation. All right, so let's grab one that could represent the our navigation. I'm just going to grab this right here. Let's let's copy, paste those in. That looks pretty good. So this would be our logo and this would be our navigation right here. Next, really all we want on this page is a title explaining what it is that this application is all about, and a few buttons to direct the user where to go. So let's go back to the wireframing kit and let's grab title and possibly subtitle. This one looks good, centered. Let's just center that. And I'm not sure we actually want a subtitle. So let's go ahead, hit the A key and delete those, select and delete those, and then select this one. I'm going to hit the E key and then drag out each side by holding the Option key, and then V to get out of there. And then I'm going to hit Option and click and drag to duplicate that, and then the Option key and drag it in again. There we go, that looks good. So we have a centered title and it's possibly 2 lines. Let's go back and grab a few buttons. I'm liking these rounded buttons, so I'm going to grab these and paste those in. That looks pretty good. I don't think we want anything more than this for the welcome page. All right, so next let's go ahead and design the sign-in page. So I'm going to copy the title and the template, just drag it over, and let's change this to sign in. All right, and then let's copy this navigation. I'm holding Shift and Option to drag that over. So this navigation is going to be a bit different, and I'm actually going to change the color of it. Let's change it to that. Whoops, that looks good. The reason I changed the color is because this is going to be overlaid on top of the full background image. And then this one, I'm thinking it should just be a white background for this navigation. To break up the content, I think it'd be good to place an image banner beneath the header, which would go with the style of the imagery we're using on the welcome page. So what we're going to do is go back to the wireframe kit. Let's grab an image. This one looks good. Paste that in. That's a little too big, so I'm going to shrink it down by holding Shift and dragging it. All right, then what I'm going to do is center this. And then I'm going to hit the A key and grab these end anchor points. And then drag those to the end. And then also let's get rid of the border radius. So let's do the same on this side. All right, and then I'm going to select the A key and grab these and make that image a bit bigger. And then let's bring that up to match the size or the padding on top and bottom. That might be slightly too high. There we go. All right, and it'd probably be good to have a title explaining what that page is. So I'm just going to copy this, paste it, and then instead of the dark color, let's make it white to stand out. And then let's shrink it, make it a bit tighter. Beautiful. All right, and then for the sign in, really all we want next is a few inputs for the email and password. So let's copy just the regular input and paste that in. That's far too large. Let's shrink that down. And we'll center that and duplicate it. Maybe bring it up slightly. All right, and then let's grab a button as well. Let's grab the dark one and paste that. I like how everything is centered here, so I'm going to stick with that and center this button. That looks pretty good. So let's move on to the next one. I like the idea of keeping this banner across the various pages, except use a different image for each page. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select these and just duplicate it. So let's do the podcasts page where we'd loop through all the various podcasts. So we'd have the navigation, then the banner with the image background and the title on top. It could say like something like discover your favorite podcast or something like that. Let's also grab or select the A key and grab these bottom anchor points. I know this page is going to be a bit larger, so I'm going to drag this down. Oh, and how I'm moving around, by the way, is I'm selecting or pushing the space bar to pull out the hand, and then you can click and drag where you want to go. Very useful. All right, so each podcast is going to have a thumbnail, probably a title, and a little description. So I think it'd be good to lay out or create a grid of the various podcasts, possibly a 3, maybe a 4-column grid. So let's go to the images. Let's grab these 3 right here and paste that in. I'm going to line it up like that, make it a bit bigger, and then make sure it's centered. Beautiful. And then let's go back and grab some text. This left justified one looks pretty good. Let's grab that, paste it in, and then let's shrink it down to match. Oops. So obviously these things won't be exact how we do it once we get into Photoshop, but it gives you an idea of what the content will lay out like. All right, so next we probably want more than one, possibly 2 or 3. Probably 9 per page would be good. That looks a bit too tight. Let's add some spacing beneath that. There we go, that looks pretty good. So we'd have 9 podcasts per page, and then obviously we'd have separate pages, so Next, we need to add some pagination. So let's go back to the wireframe kit, and under the pagination section, I'm just going to grab the buttoned centered one, and let's paste that at the bottom. Beautiful. And I'm just going to grab these anchor points and pull them back up. That looks pretty good. Okay, so next, if a user clicks on one of the podcasts, they would go to the podcast single or podcast show page. So let's create that. Let's change this to the podcast show. All right, and then we're going to stick with the navigation and banner, except we need to keep it generic to where each podcast template looks the same. So I don't think we should use a photo for the background. Instead, I'm thinking, let's see, I'm going to delete the title, subtitle. I think we should delete the image. And then let's go back to Wireframe Kit. Zoom out a bit. Let's grab a title and subtitle. And there we go. Let's expand that a bit and change the title to white. So this could be like the Sean West podcast for the title, and then the description of what that podcast is. Beneath that, I think we should make it easy to navigate between the podcast episodes. So what we are going to do next, I think, would be let's go under the buttons and to the breadcrumbs. Let's add some pagination. So let's just add that and center it. And then next, I'm just going to make a small little line to differentiate that. I'm not sure what I just did there, but let me redo it. And I'm going to change the color to something a bit lighter. All right, that way it's defined, it has its own section, it's not kind of just floating there. Okay, so how should we lay out the podcast episodes? So on the podcast show page, we probably want to loop through all of the various episodes. So let's go back to the wireframe kit, and we could either do a grid system like this for each podcast episode with the thumbnail and then the title and the description of that episode. But I think it'd be good just to differentiate the difference between the podcast and the podcast episode, to lay them out something sort of like this, to where we have the thumbnail of that episode, a title, a little description. I don't think we need these buttons. And then this can, whoops. Let me double click to go into that group so I can move it to the bottom. That looks great. And I'm going to change this from, this is meant to be a comment, so a user image. Let's change that to the regular image. And double click on that, delete it. And then I'm going to click on this, right click and ungroup. And then I'm going to select everything and hit Command G to group everything again. All right, and then we probably want multiple. So let's do something like that, make the spacing even. That looks pretty good. So it's got a defined visual hierarchy. We have the navigation up top. This would be the most important section, explaining what the podcast is all about. Shows the title, the description. We have some breadcrumbs to make it easy to navigate to and from to all the podcasts or deeper into the podcast episodes. And then we loop through all of the various episodes that this podcast has. Cool, that looks great, I think. But at some point, just like the podcast page, it will get to the point where it has too many episodes. So we probably want to add pagination to this page as well. So I'm going to delete this last border bottom and just have the pagination below. Great, that looks pretty awesome, actually. So what I'm gonna do now is I'm just going to copy this whole thing for the episodes page. And the reason I'm doing that, let's change that to episodes, is because I kind of want this to be the exact same. So you know you're on the same podcast and you can get to the various episodes or other episodes, except I want to make it so this obviously has the podcast info. So let's change things up slightly. What I'm going to do is copy this. I can delete that. Just keep the thumbnail. Let's center this content to differentiate it a bit. Let's go back and grab some text. This one might be good, the centered. I'm going to grab these anchor points and hit E, and let's drag these out. That might be a bit too much. I'm holding Alt and Shift while I do that, and then select the A key and delete that bottom one. And let's zoom in a bit. Let's shrink this one because most of the time the bottom is shorter. Okay, so we have the title, the description, and the thumbnail image, but the only thing we are missing now is the actual MP3 player. So I don't have anything in this wireframe kit that represents an MP3 player, but we can make one fairly easy. Let's copy this pagination and maybe this chart or little line graph right here and paste that in. And then what we are going to do is just make our own. So I'm going to select these three and delete those. I'm going to zoom in and let's, well, first off, let's make that slightly less rounded. Beautiful. Then I'm going to grab these anchor points and just drag those out to make it a bit wider. That looks great. Then let's drag this on top. Let's change the colors. Change this to white. That looks pretty good actually. And then I'm just going to make it a bit shorter. Beautiful. So obviously we'd have a few more buttons and stuff, like the volume and all that. But this, for just the visualization of it, this looks pretty good. So I think this is pretty great. Oops, let's group those. So we have the thumbnail, the title, the description. A difference between this description and this, we would limit the character length on this description, and then on the episode page, we'd have the full description. And then they'd be able to play the podcast episode. And then let's copy this down to make this its own little block, its own little section. And then again, we'd probably want to loop through the other podcast episodes, and that would make people more likely to continue browsing and all that. Let me delete that. Okay. And then we could add pagination here if we want as well. Actually, no. I think it'd be good to not have pagination. This could be like the 5 most recent posts or something similar. Let's delete that bottom one. That looks pretty good. So the home page, it's very simple. We're just explaining what this is all about, and then 2 call to actions. Probably sign up and then explore. And the Explorer would take you to the podcast page. Sign in. We just have the background image with the title on top and then the inputs. I didn't do sign up because it would pretty much be the same as sign in. just probably a different image. And we can mock that up once we get into Photoshop. Then the podcast page, we're doing a grid system with the pagination. The podcast show, we're doing a simple single column. And then the podcast episode, we have content and then other episodes below that. All right, so for the next step, we will jump into Photoshop and start crafting the look and the feel of this application.